Okay, Harvey, what's today's date?
Monday, October 25th, 2021, corresponding to the 20th of Mar Cheshvan, 5782.
Okay, thank you. We haven't heard that for a year and a half. Okay, so I got to this topic because the last 2 weeks we were talking about the tshuva of the Ramah, which is a very fascinating tshuva. If you recall, the story was that there was a woman who was engaged, and her father promised in the dunya a dowry, which in those days was critical, and then her father died, and she had one uncle that said he'll help out. Came the day, and the neighbor said, "Don't worry." It came the day of the wedding. She did up her hair in that fancy himnuya, and then she only had like 2/3 of the dowry. So the chassan said, "I'm out of here." So there was a big, and the wedding was Erev Shabbos. So there was a big to do, and everybody there tried. The rabbanim tried to convince the chassan to get married anyway, but he was adamant he wasn't going to get married without his nedunya. So finally, an hour and a half into Shabbos, they managed to convince him to go ahead with the wedding. The problem was that on Shabbos, the Shulchan Aruch says that you're not allowed to get married on Shabbos because of Gzeira Shema Yichtov, because we're afraid that you might write the Ksuva on Shabbos. So that's how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. So it's in the meantime, it's too late to make the wedding. If you wait until Matzah Shabbos, the chassan might change his mind. And also for the Kala, it's a big bizayon because everybody's going to know how come there's no wedding on Shabbos. They'll know it's because she didn't have in the dunya. And she'll have to wait till Sunday. And Sunday was the day that the Goyim made their weddings. There was no Jewish weddings on Sunday. They made it on their holy day. So the Ramah, who was at the wedding, paskin that she could get married on Shabbos. And that's because it's a machlokas, even though the Mishnah says you're not mekachin on Shabbos, but there's a machlokas, the Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi, whether that is even if a person has no children. According to Rabbeinu Tam, if a person has no children, so there's a mitzvah to get married, there's a mitzvah of pruvu, and therefore the mitzvah outweighs even though they made an issue d'Rabbanan, they didn't make an issue d'Rabbanan when there's an issue of pruvu. That's the position of Rabbeinu Tam. And Rashi holds that even if you don't have children, you're not allowed to get married on Shabbos. So it's a machlokas Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. Shulchan Aruch paskins like Rashi, and but the Ramah said in such a case, kedai Rabbeinu Tam lismach alav. It's worthwhile to be samech on Rabbeinu Tam. That's what we learned the last 2 weeks. So I thought that the tshuva, besides being an interesting story, it always makes it more come to life. But it also, as we learned it, I thought it shows the greatness of the Ramah, that he was willing to take achrayus to make a chasana, even though it wasn't only a machlokas Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, but the main poskim that we rely on, the Rosh, the Rambam, and the Rif, they all paskin like Rashi. They don't quote Rashi, but they're all lined up with Rashi. That you can't make a wedding on Shabbos, even if there's no children. So it's a machlokas between Rabbeinu Tam on one side, and then on the other side is Rashi, the Rosh, the Rif, and the Rambam. So that's all the big guns. So but nonetheless, you see the greatness of the Ramah, that he was willing to go out on a limb in order to save this woman the humility of not being able to get married. So he went ahead and he was matir. But what troubled me was that you can't just be matir things because it's a shas chak. You have to have some halachic basis. And if all the major poskim, the Rambam, the Rosh, and the Rif, which the Beis Yosef says that's how he decided how to paskin based on those three poskim, and the Beis Yosef also paskins the same way, and the Torah paskins the same way. So the Rabbeinu Tam is what we call das yachid. He was a minority opinion, but everybody else held that you could make a wedding on Shabbos, that you can't make a wedding on Shabbos even if there's no children. So how did the Ramah have the authority to, albeit there was a case of Shasat Chak, but how did he have the authority to go ahead and make the wedding on Shabbos? That was what was troubling me. So I want to share with you some insight into the methodology of Psak Halacha. It's a very fascinating topic. If I had a lot of free time, I thought that somebody would have written the sefer on this, because there's so many different ramifications and applications. How do you go about pasking shaylos? This is something that, as a rabbi, maybe I've shared this with you before. The hardest part of pasking shaylos is, what do you do when there's more than one opinion? It's easy nowadays. You don't have to be a talmid. You could be complete Aretz, and you could find the answer to every single question in the world. All you have to do is Google it, and you'll find it. Or else there's I call them cheating farm. It's Pidyon Aben, so there's a sefer on Pidyon Aben, and it's Muksa, there's a sefer on Miksa, English, Hebrew, Hilchos Shabbos, whatever you need to know, you could get, and you look in the index in the back, and you find what you're looking for, and the 1, 2, 3, you become an instant Talmud Chacham. But the problem is, what happens when there's more than one opinion? So one posting says that it's mutter, another one says asur. How are you supposed to decide? Bottle caps on Shabbos. Some posting say you can open them, some say you can't. So how does the rabbi make a decision? So it happens to be a very I don't even. It's a separate topic really unto itself. But the what I'm going to discuss with you tonight is, how did the Shulchan Aruch decide how to paskin? And you know that the Shulchan Aruch was written by Rav Yosef Cairo, and then the Ramah disagreed with the Shulchan Aruch on a lot of things. Rav Moshe Isserlish, and he wrote on Shulchan Aruch, on the Beis Yosef, he wrote the Arkei Moshe, and then Shulchan Aruch he wrote the Ramah. So how did they decide how to paskin? So this is a famous machlokas between the Beis Yosef and the Ramah, how to paskin when you have multiple opinions. What are you supposed to do? How do you paskin? So sometimes the Gemara, when there's a machlokas in the Gemara, sometimes the Gemara tells you what the halacha is. Hilchos Abaye, or Hilchos Rava, or Hilchos Rabbi Akiva. But here we're dealing with arguments that are post Gemara. So you have a machlokas rishonim. Some rishonim say it's mutter. Some rishonim say it's asur. So how do you wade through this problem of how to paskin? So both Rav Yosef Cairo and the Ramah deal in their Hakdama. They explain how they paskin shaylos, and this was the fact that there's a method how to paskin. It really, if there wasn't, Klal Yisrael would have been thrown into total chaos, because you know that it's already like almost a joke. If somebody asks me, what my kids know, if somebody asks me a question, so my answer is going to be, it's a machlokas. Like almost in everything, there's a machlokas. There's this opinion, that opinion. So, if we don't have a method of deciding between the different opinions, then Klal Yisrael is going to be so fractionated. And then if every Rav is going to make his own method of how he's going to paskin, then there'll be no achdus in Klal Yisrael, and it'll tear the Jewish community asunder. So with Siyata D'Shmaya and Hashgacha Pratis, Rav Yosef Cairo wrote the Beis Yosef, which is his commentary on the Torah, and then he condensed it and he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. And for the Sephardic community, that became the absolute law, that the final halacha. He took all these cases of machlokas, and he paskined on them. How we're knowing. And then the Ramah did the same thing, except that the Ramah was in Eastern Europe, and there was different minhagim there. So the Ramah presented the minhagim of Eastern Europe. So what they did was, they had, so Klal Yisrael is split in two. It's split between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim. But that's not so terrible, because they lived in different places anyway. But if it would have been every rabbi is going to have his opinions about 1,000 things, and then the Baal Batim are going to know, my rabbi said it's mutter, my rabbi says it's just going to, and it's amazing that, you know how argumentative Jews are. The fact that they accepted the authority of the Beis Yosef and the Ramah, Moshe Isserlish, was just it's like almost a nace. It's Hashgacha Pratis, that their authority was accepted. They both lived at the time when the printing press made what was his name? Gutenberg. He invented printing It was 15 something.
14.
Or 14 something. So it was just after they both lived. The Beis Yosef and the Ramah both lived in the 1500s. So they had in not only were they able to write a sefer, but they were able to disseminate it throughout the Klal Yisrael. So you had these the two major works of the final Psak Halacha, the Rav Yosef Cairo and the Ramah. So they, in their introductions, they explain how you're going to decide. What are you going to do? You have all these Rishonim that have different opinions, and how you're going to decide it. So on the first page, I didn't underlay, but if you look in the second paragraph, Nimsa, the Beis Yosef says that he's gathered together all the different shittas and different Rishonim. So he says, Nimsa Shemishi Yosef Zel Lefanav Yisudur Lefanav Deya Talmud and Pirish Rashi. If you'll have the Beis Yosef, which is a very long commentary, so you'll have Rashi, V'Tosfos, V'Ran, Upiski Harif, V'Harash, V'Mordechai, V'Harambam, V'Hagosa, this is the Hagos on the Rambam, Umagid Mishnah, V'Rein Yerucham, V'Sefer Truma, V'Shibol HaLakit, V'Harokeach, V'Shari Dura, V'Sefer Tashbatz, V'Sefer Itor, V'Nivku Yosef, Usmak, V'Orchas Chaim, V'Toras Abayis, V'Hagos Hashvi, V'Sefer Manik, V'Igor, V'Sefer Bali Nefesh Arai, V'Teshuvas Arash, V'Rashba, V'Ari Bar Sheshes, V'Shimon Bar Tzemach, V'Ari Kolon, Chumas Adeshen. And then on top of it, he says, called Uviksas Mekalmas Mamari Hazar. So he has, I didn't count them, but he's got about 10, 15 different poskim. So it's a challenge. So how do we paskin? So here in this paragraph, where I have the bar, the Ola Bedaiti, this is a famous position of the Beis Yosef. Ola Bedaiti. She'achar kol hadvarim efsek halacha, after all these different positions that there are. Oh, and then in the next paragraph he has more svarim that he found. He found Sefer Arachayim to Maria Avuhov, and okay. So they says, so what do we? He figured out how he's going to pass it. V'achriya bein hasvaras. The purpose of having the Shulchan Aruch is that there should be one final position, not to tell people if you write down the some svarim they tell you everything there is to know, and you come out knowing nothing, because if there's so many positions. I always tell it to doctors, these medical svarim, they're wonderful, but a doctor has to know what to do on the spot. If he's in the emergency room Friday night, it doesn't help him to know that there's 32 different svarim that talk about it, and some say this way, that way. So the Shulchan Aruch wanted to have one final position. If we'll say that we'll enter the fray, and we'll bring rayas back and forth, and based on our understanding of the sugya, I'll paskin according to which Rishonim. The early Rishonim all have extensive discussions. Tosas, Rashi is very minimal, but Tosas, that's what Tosas is. Tosas is a collection of opinions about with all sorts of kashas and terutzim, and then the Rashba and the Ramban and the Rad, they all followed in his footsteps. So who's going to be so great that he's going to be able to stand in the middle between all these great gedolim? The Tosas, the Rambam, and the Rosh. This is a famous phrase. Who's going to put his head between the mountains? The mountains of God. You're going to bring proofs against what they proved their way, and you're going to bring proofs to prove it different way. Or you're going to make decisions that they didn't decide. Our intellect is too weak to understand properly what they had to say. There's a general principle in Torah study, and that is that in contrast to the sciences, where every generation knows more than the generation before, when it comes to Torah, every generation has less understanding than the generation before. That's why an Amora can't disagree with a Tana, and a Rishon can't disagree with an Amora, and an Achron generally will not disagree with a Rishon, because we assume that those that came earlier, they had greater depth of understanding. So he says, so how especially how are we going to go ahead, especially since our understanding is limited. Koshken is chakim, certainly we're not going to be outsmart them. And he says, even if it would be possible to do that, to make a hachra between all the different positions, it's too cumbersome, and we'll never get to the end. So here's what he says, what he decided to do. There's three main pillars of halacha in Klal Yisrael: Halohema, Harif, Varambam, Harash. Those are the three major pillars among the poskim. So Marti Alivi b'makom sheshnayim mehem maskimin l'das achas nifsek halacha kavosam. He says he goes basarov. If everybody agrees, so it's easy to decide. But if you have one dissenting opinion, it can't be 2 against 2 because you only have three poskim. So between the three, so you go according to the majority. Nifsek halacha kavosam. In lo b'mixas mekama shekol chachma Yisrael. He says there's rare occasions where he doesn't paskin according to the Rov because most of the later poskim were in disagreement, and therefore he paskined according to the minhag that they didn't follow those poskim. But that's the position of the Beis Yosef. You go after these three poskim.
Rabbi, what if there are 3 different opinions?
Yeah, that's true. If there's 3 different opinions, so then it's a toss-up. I don't know. He doesn't discuss that here. That's a very good point. So, what could you ask on the Beis Yosef's methodology that he's going to paskin? He says the 3 main poskim are the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh. So he goes after the Rov. He goes majority rules.
Yeah, but if there's no majority, one guy's at one. Last paragraph is somebody abstains, and you only have 2.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's in that last paragraph. But I have a more fundamental question. What does it mean? There's only 3 poskim. There's though a few paragraphs before he counted 15 poskim.
He crowned these 3.
What?
He crowned these 3.
Yeah. So by what authority did he crown these 3? And why don't you say Acharei Rabbim Wahato? So if you make a list of all the different poskim. And the truth is, we don't even know all the poskim. I mean, we only have a tiny fraction of svarim from. So maybe what's not written, we don't have to deal with. We can't deal with. We don't know. But even if you just go with what's known, so how did the Rif, the Rush, the Rambam, and the Rush, how did they become the triumvirate to decide what the halach is? And in fact, that's what the Ramah disagrees with. The Ramah does not agree that we should follow those 3 poskim, because you look on the next page, the Ramah says, the Ramah wrote on the Tur is the Shulchan Aruch is patterned after the Tur. The Tur wrote all the 4 Chelkei Shulchan Aruch was written by the Tur. The Tur was Rabbeinu Yaakov, who was the son of the Rosh. And then on the side of the Tur is, on one side is the Beis Yosef, that's Rav Yosef Cairo, and the other side is the Bach, and then on the bottom is the Darkei Moshe. The Darkei Moshe is Rav Moshe Isserlish. So here he has Hakdama to the Darkei Moshe. He says, and then he condensed it. Both the Beis Yosef and the Ramah condensed their commentaries on the Tur, and that's where we have the Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber, and the Ramah. So he says, Ishu b'Krakow v'Shmo Yisrael. There was a man living in Krakow whose name was Yisrael. Asher Nazva Rucho Vanabeis Knesses L'Kel, and he built a shul to the Ribbon Shalom. Vani b'no, and I'm skipping. Vani b'no Moshe Nar Yisi v'Dayin Ozakanti. And I was a young child. My name was Moshe, and the reason why I read to you this paragraph is because those of us have been to Krakow have been in that shul. The shul that this was written in 1550 or so. So it was written. How many years is that? About 475 years ago. So the Ramah shul is still standing. It's a nice that it's still standing in Krakow. The shul is standing, and there's a chair in the shul that has a plaque on it that says this is the chair of the Ramah, and then outside the shul, in the back of the shul, is a cemetery that has who's who Gedolim, and the Ramah's kever is right behind his shul. So he says, and his father's name was Yisrael, and his father built that shul that's still standing. It was built by his father, and he says, I was a young man. He's borrowing from that phrase that we say in benching. My own vineyard, right? In Shiur, my own vineyard. I didn't cultivate, or I didn't watch. But nonetheless, even though I was still young and I didn't know very much. So this is in his modesty. He says, "But I was appointed over others." So he said that he was appointed the posek for Krakow, but he became not only the posek for Krakow, he became the posek for all of the Eastern European Jewry. So, and if you skip now to further down, he says, Uveruchu Masei Kol Habolatar Pasuk Lishar. It's written very flowery. He says the Ribbon Shalom who assists anybody that wants to be purified. He opened for me a gate. He said there's all these. He also has lists of all the different poskim. So he says the Ribbon Shalom put it in my mind that I should condense the tshuva. So v'zeh derech shekain nahara, and that way there will be more light. And this way things will be clearer. And by the way, my intellect said I also thought, besides condensing it, I'll put it into one sefer. And I'll have it all together. And I'll pick some, instead of writing my own sefer, I'll find somebody else who wrote a sefer, and on the margin of that sefer, I'll have the condensed version of all these shuvas. For Isi Shein told me sefer haturim. He said the best sefer was the Tur. Because the Tur has a terrific seder, which is true. It's just the seder of the Tur was a monumental event. That he took all of Torah, which was in the Gei Halacha Maisa, and he organized it. The organization of the Tur is phenomenal. It's easy to find what you're looking for. Even somebody who's not that knowledgeable, whether they're old or young. And this was what I decided I'll do. Miyad as masni azarti. So right away I girded my loins. Umishnas tarmei and I chased away sleep. I was helped with I almost finished. I went through all of Torah literature and all the Dalet Chachis Shulchan Aruch. And I took all the different poskim and the chuvas, and I gathered them. And I did it according to the organization of the Tur. I didn't sleep. And if I did sleep, I don't know what that phrase means. What?
Not sure.
This was my portion from all the work that I was doing. I was able to have Siyat Shema. I wrote very quickly. This would be really, you need a foundation of 100 people to work on this, but he did it single-handedly. And as I mentioned last week and 2 weeks ago, the Ramah died at a relatively young age. I sifted through the different positions, and in the gross, even though they're all Divrei Chaim, but still he decided which ones are more. He highlighted v'lo ba'arach hatzos. He says, I tried to write it in cryptic manner, u'lefamim hinachti arach advar minei halos, and many times I wrote it shorter because of pressure. U'lechein b'chol makom haklal v'ikol lekachti, I took out the essence, v'ashari nachli, everything ba'av. V'derech zeh halachti ad makom shiyodeh ha'isum agas, b'chorim nisadakim b'dakti ulon l'chad. So this was a major effort. He rewrote. He's not talking about the Darkei Moshe. He's talking about, he wrote a sefer on the Torah. The same way the Beis Yosef wrote a sefer on the Torah, the Moshe Isilish composed a commentary on the Torah where he condensed all these farms. Uvagia Torah Esther, Torah Esther is in Megillah Esther. When Esther's turn came, and I got up to Hilchos Chala, I was overcome with fear and fright. B'shami ner Yisrael Rosh Hagol, because I heard that the candle of the Jewish people, the head of the Gola, Ari Misavcho Allah, the lion came from his den. El Shemayim V'Ruach Elokim Kadishim B'Chofno, it's the Spirit of God. Asaf Achiber Sefer Beis Yosef. He's sitting in Krakow. In the meantime, in Eretz Yisrael, the Beis Yosef did the exact same thing. Asher kol ra yodin es ma'alasav es tova ruach tov hatzav. Everybody could see what a terrific work it is, the Beis Yosef. Az nifhalti shepoel harek palti. And I was overwhelmed, because it means that all my work was for naught. Because if the Beis Yosef made such a work, it's redundant for me to do the same thing the Beis Yosef did. V'shigiyasi garik. Everything I toiled was in vain. V'shinasi b'china mimeno gazalti ve'al ha'nor hazeh hispalalti, and I cried for this matter. If I was going to go write my own sefer, it was unnecessary. It was superfluous next to the Beis Yosef. Ushraga b'tiyar mayahani. A candle doesn't do any good when there's daylight. Ukapis me'etz yavish kamoni mayana. A chip from a board of wood like me. What can I say already? Kividiyoso hakolal sikilakol. The Beis Yosef, Rav Yosef Karo, with his vast knowledge, he incorporated everything. Vashem birachos called. Davar echim enagol nofim called. Uviyosi yam and ramim bizosim mevucha. So it was for many days. I was walking around in the days. I didn't have. I was unsettled. My insides were melted like water. So at least one bracha. What? Yeah, like Esav. The saying li derech emes bilvavi shelo yu kol dvarim genuzim. That give me something that I shouldn't have to bury all my work. V'soch habayim yu remuzim, and in the future generations my work will have some impact. So the Rebbeinu Shalom heard my tefillah. So So how did the Rebbeinu Shalom lead him? And he led me on a clear path like the sun. And there was a spirit of God, I guess, that told me that he left. There is a bracha for me, and my pain or my anger subsided. You see how beautiful it is. The mastery of all of Tanakh and Chazal, and besides being an unbelievable posek, the Beis Yosef was was fabulous writer, as was the Beis Yosef, the Ramamin, as was the Beis Yosef. V'marti avina divrei sefer Beis Yosef achriso, ki amar li Elokim al tira also es Beis Yosef. God put in my mind not to be afraid and overwhelmed by the Beis Yosef. Why? Even though I can't duplicate what he did, but nonetheless I have a place in front of the great noble people. What you should do is, this is what the idea that he felt that Hashem planted in his mind, is to write it in an abbreviated fashion. Usimanim segulim with divrei sofnas panech megalim, and they'll reveal it, things that are hidden. They'll reveal. But oh no, safe Nosa Shigim Dvar Rabbis Hatoalim B'Dvarai Necham. And there's three advantages to what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a condensed version of the of all these svarim. So we don't have his sefer. He wrote a whole sefer on the Shulchan Aruch. It's a shame that we don't have it, but he didn't publish it. But he went and then he wrote a condensed version. So he says there's three purposes of having this condensed version. The first is that you should have everything in brief. Because if you have it, if it too much is oppressive for Talmidim like me, the Talmidim, they want to learn the whole Torah on 1 foot, like the Ger that came before Hillel, in 1 hour. Even though I had weak knees, the Rambam says, so Rav Amar is the Rambam. The Rambam says, because he authored the Moreh Nevuchim, the long presentation, too much. That's what ruins things. If you have too much information, that's all. I always tell people, when you want to learn something, if you want to know it, don't learn a lot. When I learned for smicha, a lot of my friends, they were learning the Pri Megadim and the Rikvegers. I said, I don't want to know that because it just be mevalbim. It just confused me. I learned the Shach and Taz, and that's it. Okay. The Gemara in Sota says that there's some Tanaim who were destroying the world with their Amaratzis. It's the Tanaim that only learned Mishnah. They didn't learn Gemara. So those people, they didn't understand things properly. So they could come out with a crazy psak that a sheretz a star. But nonetheless, I followed in the footsteps of the Rambam in the Tur. And the one thing also I added, and I put in exactly what the source is. So in that way, if somebody wants to look it up, they'll be able to know where. That was one of the criticisms of the Rambam, that you don't know where his sources are. Let's go to the next paragraph. Hashain is the second value of what I did. Shosafti al dvarav kama v'kama. I added more material. Uparatzti negba v'yama b'divrei rishonim achronim halol l'kim pisronim. He added many other svarim. And then if you skip another 2 lines, Volkasafti harbi chuvas ka'onim, chuvas achronim, chuvas mariyu v'divrei esveheter harach. He added all the Chaber Beis Yosef Aram Miyama. Beis Yosef didn't see all these svarim, so he added more svarim in his condensed version of the Darkei Moshe. And here, this is the important paragraph for us. The third thing that I added to the Beis Yosef that made my work of value. And this was the main goal. He wanted, he was drawn to the great poskim. He paskin according to 2 or 3 edim. If everybody agreed, he passed that way. But even if 2 agreed, he passed that way. Who are the 3 that he paskin like? Harifa, Rama, Varash. If 2 of them agree, then he wasn't concerned about the third position. And the Rambam would pass in according to 2 out of 3. Even though they were the earlier poskim, they were not the later poskim. And the Beis Yosef ignored something that the early Rishonim wrote about themselves. The Rosh Pasuk Sof Perak Beis the Ervim V'Skimi Wa Rabban L'Lipsik Halach V'Chol Makom Kabasrei V'Locho Shedivi Kamoi. The Rif himself, who's one of those big 3 guns, the Rif said that you paskin like the later poskim and not the earlier poskim. But feel b'makom harav eitzel tamid. Even if the later poskim were talmidim of the earlier ones, v'chein poskim achronim tamid. And that's how the poskim paskim. Rosh Marik Riyal Betshuva say on Emos That's how the Marik and the Rio, I think, is the Trumas Adeshin. That's how they pass it. Asher behen hiro kol mechshav v'gil kol talus. They lit up the darkness. V'ayidei zeh hadavar saser kol amin hagim asher be'el medinos. By the Beis Yosef, by ignoring the Basrai, because there were many Sfarim that came after the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh. The Rambam, the Beis Yosef ignored all of them. Asher Rubam benuyim ahakab azev b'pshitus utmimos, ve'em mifak b'macharein, and most of those Sfarim, they follow the rule that the passing like the Basrai. And that's why I said I wrote what the minig is. And I also quoted the source. If there was no source, if it was his own svar, he would write nearly. So you know that it's his own svar. If I made a mistake, then you know it's my fault. So what basically he's saying is that the Beis Yosef selected those three Sfarim, but they were the early Rishonim. He felt that we shouldn't be encumbered by what the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh passed. There are other Sfarim that came afterwards, and they also, and if anything, they are more important than in terms of Psak Halacha, because you're supposed to pass like the Basrai. The reason why you pass like the Basrai, what's the reason for that? Why should, if they're not as great, if we say that every generation there's a decline, so why should we pass like the later poskim? We should pass like the earlier poskim.
Because they see all the ones before.
Because they had the advantage of knowing what everybody else said, and they could look at 10 svarim, and they saw all the kashas and all the terutzim. You know, like now it's easy to be Talmud Chacham because we have in the library the Mesifta Gemaras, and they quotes in the footnotes all the different shittas, and then you give a shiur, you sound like you're a genius, that you know this one said this and this one said that. I can't like to tell you that that's how I find out, but that's the advantage of being a Basrai, that you're able to know what everybody said, and then you could come up. So that's basically where the Ramah parted ways with Rav Yosef Karo. Rav Yosef Karo passes according to the Rav Tharish and Rambam, whereas the Ramah paskin according to later Svarim, and he included that, and he didn't limit the even though the halacha is karabim, yacharam halacha karabim, but the rabbim, his rabbim is not the same rabbim as the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef's rabbim is only those three Svarim, and his rabbim incorporated all other Svarim. So the big question is so what's Sakab Shan in the Beis Yosef? How come the Beis Yosef paskin like those, and you know, even if you don't hold, aside from what the Ramah says that the halacha is like the Basrai, but why are those three the only poskim? What about the Rashba and the Ramban and the Ritva and the Ran? So what makes that the three that you're going to select from? So the Shem Megdalim, this is written by the Chidah, writes the following, page 4. The dash kibalti miziknei Torah v'yer sheshamu mipeh kadosh harav hagadol ir v'kadish maharach Abu Lafia. He was one of the he was a late Rishon. Shekibla biyado shal klal marim b'sak halacha. The Chidah, the author of the Shem Gedolim, he lived in Eretz Yisrael. I told you many times, he traveled throughout Europe. He saw thousands and thousands of svarim and manuscripts in the libraries. He had a photographic memory. He memorized everything that he saw, and then he wrote a lot of svarim. On Shulchan Aruch, there's the Birkei Yosef and other svarim. So we have sources there where we don't even have the sources, the svarim that he quotes. So he says that he heard from the Rach Abu Lafia, Shekabal biyado shal klal marim b'psak halacha l'echsar shlosh amudi beis Yisrael harif v'ram v'rosh hiskimu karav l'masayim rabbanim b'daro. There were 200 rabbanim in the Beis Yosef's generations that concurred. Those are the three that you should select them. The kacha yamurgo b'pumei derav hanisker ki kol sheyasa kipsat moran hine hu also kamasayim rabbanim. When you follow the psak of the Beis Yosef, is not following. In other words, I guess he's trying to address this problem of why don't we go after the Rov? Because you have the Rov and the Rabban, you have 200 Rabbanim who are the great Gaonim. They endorsed the Mahalach of the Beis Yosef. If you look a little bit further, let me show you on page. Look on page 6. This is in the Yechavadas from Rabbi Yosef. He says, "V'hagon Rav Yosef Chazam b'shal Shiur Chikri Leiv hevi divrei Maran Achida." Now he quotes the Chida that I just showed you, that there were 200 Rabbanim that endorsed the positions of the Beis Yosef. The Kosev Shenir Shemasayim Rabbanim Achrio came berayos, and there was a reason. They didn't just do it arbitrarily, but they had rayos that you should paskin like the Ram, the Rif, and the Rosh. He says, "V'chein Kosev Sei Chikri Leiv she'osa kipsak." Maran also kedas Masayim Rabbanim. The Chikri said if you follow the Beis Yosef, you're following 200 Rabbanim. The note the Shadarshe Rishumos Amru Maran. The Beis Yosef is always referred to as Maran, our master. So it's Rashi Tevos. I never knew this before. Right? Maran is Rashi Tevos Masayim Masayim Rabbanim Nismach. The Beis Yosef was endorsed by 200 Rabbanim. He means to say because the Beis Yosef, there were 200 Rabbanim that endorsed the position of the Beis Yosef. Nonetheless, Rabbi Yosef says, "Vadayin tzrichanu l'modai hadam shomar na Beis Yosef siato shenogo lipso k'shloshes amudei haroa neged rov haposkim." What is the reason, though? In fact, even though they had 200 Rabbanim, but why did they select only these three? The rule is always you go after the Rov. So what is in fact the reason why you only go after those three? What happens if there's all the like 20 other Sfarim that we know about? They can have different positions. If a person says, if there's a machlokas whether I own something, and somebody else says I own it, and I say no, I own it, and it's a machlokas of poskim, who owns it? So even if the majority of poskim are in agreement with him, I could say I believe that this posik is right, even though he's from the minority. That's called kimli. You're allowed to attach yourself. You're allowed to say I accept the authority of the yachid. So Apple P shemufurish b'toshevet shemiyat ayam negarov commandul asadami. Even though why do we say Kimli helps? Why don't we say that if there's 1 against 10, it's as if he's non-existent. Mishum shelo kasu kenetosis ela kishadayam nosin biyachad panim. This rule that you go after Rov is only if the Rabbanim discussed it together. Bezdin used to go. The Bezdin of Ayin Aleph, there were 71 people on the Bezdin, so they would follow the principle of Achir Ramu Lahatos. The Kemish of Rov Mechayvim will go kibbutz Tani Samid Luzakos Hooray Amid Kamisheno. The Achir Ramu Lahatos. If you have a discussion among the Bezdin, and the majority of Bezdin holds a certain way, so the minority opinion is as if it doesn't exist. But when it comes to the poskim, there was no internal discussion. It's possible that the majority would agree to what the minority opinion is. And then he says, okay, skip 2 lines. He says, "Ufiza nicha das maran shara lipsa kamud hara neged rov poskim mishum sharov eino machriya kolkach kemish lo nasu b'psav panam." So therefore, the Beis Yosef selected the 3 major pillars for Psak Halacha, and he wasn't concerned about the fact that there were other poskim that were in disagreement because there was no discussion between the poskim. So therefore, you're not encumbered by the position of the Rov. So anyway, that is the position. That the Beis Yosef holds that you go after the Rov, and he goes Ram Rosh and Tur, the Ram Rosh and the Rif, and there were 200 rabbanim that endorsed that. And Rabbi Yosef says that you don't say Acharab Melahatos in such a case because they had no internal, they didn't sit and talk it over with each other. But the Ramah holds that the Ramah rejects the fact that these three poskim are the main poskim, and he says that you go after Basra, you go after later poskim. Now I found that, so I'm coming back to the issue about how come the Ramah ignored the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh when he said that you could Kedai Rabbeinu Tam Lismach Alav. So Rabbeinu Tam is still only one person. So how come he paskin, even though he says you could go after the Basra, you could go after the later poskim, but he didn't quote any later poskim that disagree with the Rif, the Rosh, and the Rambam. The Ramah just quotes Rabbeinu Tam. So how come the Ramah paskind like Rabbeinu Tam? So I found on page 5, the Yamshel Shlomo says, he's also discussing how we paskin, and he says, Shabali Hatosis Talmid Rabbeinu Tam Hayu L'Rov. The Bali Tosfos, they were all Talmidim of Rabbeinu Tam. He was the main Baal Tosfos. There were numerous Bali Tosfos. Kishmonim Bali Tosfos Hayu, but Perak Echad of Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam gave a shiur for 80 Talmidim, and you can imagine those 80 Talmidim were the giants of Klal Yisrael. The Chol Echad Hagil Hara, and those 80 they were not high school kids that were just starting out. These were giants in Psak, Kagon Rav Chaim Katz, Rav Lazar Mimins, Rav Shimon Mishans, V'Chaverav, V'Talmidim L'Rov Below Mispar. And so he says that the Rabbeinu Tam has a status of a just like the Beis Yosef said, the Chidos of the Beis Yosef has a status of 200 rabbanim, but the Yamshel Shlomo was Shlomo Luria. He was a contemporary of Moshe Isserlish. They both lived in Krakow. He was a cousin, and he was a little bit older than the Ramah, and he also had this same idea that he would write a sefer on halacha. He wrote the Yamshel Shlomo, which is very similar to the Beis Yosef. It's not condensed, and he has long discussions. So, but the Yamshel Shlomo says that when you Rabbeinu Tam's position is not just one person, that's a majority position. And if you look on the bottom of the page, the Chavis Yair, who his name was Bachrach. I forgot what his first name was. Yair, Rabbi Bachrach. So he says on the bottom, "V'lokosav harash b'tshuva shekabol b'yadenu shechachmei tzarfas heima b'alitosus heimuflogim ugedolim yoser me'arambam." That the Rosh says that the Bali Tosfos were greater than the Rama. It's like an astounding statement. That we would never even get involved in such a discussion, but he says that he was great in Ram. Now I searched high and low for this Rush, I could not find it, and then I found other people said they couldn't find it either. In the further up on the page, it says the Yamshel Shlomo quotes a similar statement. He says, "Al matzasi b'tshuvas harash shekasav she'ish Ramban gadol hayam ol b'chal chachmos achen kishulchok Rabbeinu Tam b'ri shelo l'shmo alav." Even though the Ramban was very great in chachma, in many chachmos, but when the Rabbeinu Tam and the Ri, the main Bali Tosas disagree, you shouldn't listen to the Ramban. Achar Bali Tosas kikabol biyado sheRabbeinu Tam v'Ri v'tzarfatim hayu gedolim b'chachma min yoser min Ramban. They were greater than the Ramban. So this is probably the same statement that the Chavis Yair is making, but the Chavis Yair says about the Rambam, and the Yamshel Shlomo says about the Ramban. We don't know. Maybe there was a printer's error. When he says that the Ramban was gadol me'od b'chol chachmos, it sounds more like he's talking about the Rambam, because the Rambam was, and it would make sense therefore that they're both talking about the same thing, and they're both quoting Shuvas Harash. So the Ramah therefore was comfortable paskening like Rabbeinu Tam, because he wasn't just passing like Rabbeinu Tam, he was passing based on a whole entourage of poskim. So then I saw someplace that they said that I don't remember where I put it in here, that the main, that the Ramah followed consistently the Rabbeinu Tam. That was for the Ramah.
He said he was greater than the Rambam.
He says greater than Rambam. Yeah, but he's
But I said the Bali Tosfos are greater than the Rambam.
right. But somebody, I don't know where I had it, but oh, you see on the bottom it says Kain Kosev Hakdamas Yam Shalom Baba Kama Af Kilo Risa B'Shalos Shuvas Tarash. He had the same problem I had. He couldn't find it in the Shalos Shuvas. But okay, I know that I saw that the Ramah was Saimech primarily on Rabbeinu Tam. I know I saw. Okay, there was a very important point here. Okay, but I'll have to find it afterwards. That the Ramah paskin like Rabbeinu Tam. So, therefore, it seemed to me that the question that I raised before, that how is it that the Ramah ignored the Rambam, the Rosh, and the Rif, and he went and he passed like Rabbeinu Tam? So the answer is very clear, because he followed the Bali Tosis. That was the Ramah. And he also was he also followed later poskim, and we don't, just because the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh had one unified position doesn't mean that the later poskim didn't disagree. I mean, the Ramah says Kedai Rabbeinu Tam Lismach Alav. So you see that he was being somech on Rabbeinu Tam. So, but it doesn't. There's the Ravad Yosef wanted to know how come the Beis Yosef wasn't worried about Acher Rabban Lahatas. You could ask the same thing on the Ramah. So the answer is the Ramah followed Rabbeinu Tam, who was like 80 poskim. The 80, if you go through Shas, if you're Baki in Shas and Tosas, you know the names of all the different Bali Tosas. Each Masechta has different Bali Tosas. They were all super geniuses and the tremendous Talmidei Chacham.
You'll see the Ravadia didn't necessarily follow the Shulchan Aruch.
Ravad Yosef his shita was we follow the Beis Yosef, because he held that Eretz Yisrael is Asra Damar. That was, the Beis Yosef was the Rav of Eretz Yisrael, and in Eretz Yisrael they were Mekabel the Beis Yosef as the final word, and therefore he always follows the Beis Yosef. That was his big machlokas with the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai, who was the Rav in Baghdad, who wrote the Sefer Yochanan Boaz that we have here, the Ben Ish Chai deviated from the Beis Yosef in many things. I mean, he was also a super Paisik, and Ravad Yosef made it one of the main goals or missions of his life was that we should return to following the Beis Yosef.
But yet he quotes 30, 40.
You're right. He quotes. He does quote. He quotes and he quotes and quotes. The Mishnah Berurah also. A lot of times the Mishnah Berurah, when the Mishnah Berurah decides what the halacha is, the Mishnah Berurah quotes all the poskim that he was able to find. I mean, the question is, he didn't have the Otzar Chachma with the 100,000 svarim that we have now. So, but yeah, okay. So as I said, exactly how these klolim of Psak Halacha work out, I don't know. I'm not sure, but I just want to show you one last thing. That so I'll before I show it to you, I'll ask you this question: If the Ramah thought that the halacha is like Rabbeinu Tam, so how come in the Shulchan Aruch he doesn't pass like Rabbeinu Tam? The Shulchan Aruch says you're not allowed to make kedusha on Shabbos, and then he says, however, it's the Shas Chak, then you can make kedusha on Shabbos, and it's based on what he wrote in his tshuva, that when there's a need you can. But why is it only b'Shas Chak if he's primarily following the Rabbeinu Tam? So he should have said that that's the halacha. So if you look here this is another sefer written by the Ramah called Torah Chatas. He says, "V'hine," on page 10. I'm sorry, the next to last page. "V'hine esnatzel atzvi b'davar echad shlo yachshaduni ha'ayin." I have to write a defense of myself so that people should not accuse me of acting improperly. A lot of times in the Shulchan Aruch, it says that you can be makel b'makom hefsid. If there's going to be a financial loss, you can be makel. Ani b'davar chashiv, or if it's relevant for a poor person. You have these famous stories that they used to show the chickens or the cows to the Rav, and then if somebody would come in and he would pass in that it's awesome, then he saw they had no money, so he said for you it's mutter, because in b'makom hefsid you're saimech, you're a mekel. Ola kavod Shabbos. Another situation of necessity is if it's for kavod Shabbos. For who? So the question is, why? How come you're allowed to bend the halacha when there's a financial need? If the halacha is the halacha, if right place can hold a certain way, why aren't you mechuyev to pass in the way? So he says, "Kiva also mekamos ha'nili ki heter gamar who aliv the hilchasa rak the hilchasa." He says, really, the main psak halacha. Whenever I say that you can be making makom hefsid, it means that the main psak is that it's mutter. But however, but the Achronim came along and they said it's better to be machmer. He says whenever he says that halacha b'makom hefsid, it's because really the halacha is it's mutter. But there are others that were machmer. So he also went along with the chumrah. But it's only a chumrah, so therefore if there's a necessity, then he reverts back to the main halacha. It's a very important principle. Rav Moshe says the same klal. I'm not going to read it now, but on the next page. So then it's everything works out perfectly now. The reason why the Rabbeinu Tam in the Shulchan Aruch didn't paskin in I should have photographed it for you here, photocopy. I didn't. In the Shulchan Aruch, in the Ramah, first Ramah says the halacha is you don't make kedushin on Shabbos. And then then further on he says, but if it's a big tzarech and there's it's Erev Shabbos, if the chasa was delayed Erev Shabbos and it's going to be embarrassment, then you can make kedusha on Shabbos. So I asked you why, if he's passing Rabbeinu Tam, so why didn't he pass him straight through? So the answer is because he was machmir, because since the Rosh and the Rif and the Rambam are machmir and Rashi, so he felt it's better to be machmir. But Me'ikar Hadin, he thought it was mutter. So since Me'ikar Hadin is, why? Because he follows Rabbeinu Tam, and Rabbeinu Tam comes with an entourage of 80 Baalei Tosfos. So therefore, he said what he said, that when there was a necessity, he was willing to be mekel. So that's how I think is a fair presentation of how the Shulchan Aruch does not make any exceptions. The Shulchan Aruch says that you're not allowed to be Kaddish on Shabbos, even if you have no children, period. It doesn't make any exceptions, because the Shulchan Aruch doesn't follow the Rabbeinu Tam. The Shulchan Aruch follows Ram and Rosh and Rif, and they're unified. There's not even 2 against 1, it's 3 against nobody. So that's what the Shulchan Aruch passes. You follow the Ram and the Rif and the Rosh. Okay, these are, I started in the beginning to say that how we resolve halachic issues is very fascinating, and there's a lot of kolam. Rav Yosef has a lot of chuvas about it. I didn't copy all of them for you, but it's a. I'm sure somebody must have written a sefer collecting all the different rules, and like this question when the Beis Yosef quotes 2 opinions. How do we paskin? He says a lot of times he said the halach's like this, and this is v'yesh omrim, and some say like that. We passing like the first opinion, like the second opinion. So you need to have rules, because you have to have a way, you have to have a methodology of being able to resolve conflicts. Okay. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And Izzy, good night to you in Eretz Yisrael. And Bob, have a great trip.
Thank you very much. Hopefully.